Hey guys, we are back with another Why the Pros Play video. Now, the last time that I did Why the Pros Play Dehaka, I was talking more about the playstyle that was being used in HGC, which was kind of that checkmate position that everyone really knew about, where you would run tissue regen to get 60 essence, and you would run primal rage, so you had that extra 60% of the time. Now it's 75% attack damage, which allowed you to push really heavily if you were left alone and still join the team fight for the things like the isolation, the tongue, and just the large distraction. So that was the old playstyle that was utilized in HEC. Then we talked a little bit about some of his other playstyles that have gained some popularity, like the enhanced agility, going into their backline, being a distraction, and Enduring Swarm, which is the W build that just makes you extraordinarily tanky. We're looking at a game with Liam on 30k. This is a CCL game, so these players are paid just to be here, and they are the current professionals. Sure, they don't really make enough to pay their bills off of this, but neither really did the professionals in HEC, as they made about $20,000 a year. And for some people that's enough, but for most people in the United States, $20,000 a year is not quite living wage. That being said, we're not getting anything else in here. We are going to be talking about the current professional players in this game and seeing what they can do with this. So Liam is going to be playing Dehaka, and he is going to be going the W build, the Dark Swarm build. What is the purpose of the Dark Swarm build? What are your goals during these games, and how do you abuse it? Well, the goal is basically to abuse the W and in a few major talents. Level 1 isn't absolutely necessary that you go this talent, but it certainly makes it easier having that spell armor and also having that increased duration. Then you go into Hero Stalker, which allows you to gain more essence each time that you hit an enemy hero, which you hit twice per second, and you can hit multiple heroes at a time, getting a lot of essence during team fights. Then you go into level 7 with Symbiosis. The more times you hit the enemy heroes, the less cooldown you have on your W. So in very chaotic fights, you can have your W with almost no cooldown and keep it up almost the entire time, repeatedly activating Essence Collection and staying rather tanky. Level 13, in the competitive environment, generally takes Ferocious Stalker, and then level 16 generally goes into Tunneling Claws, or Pack Leader, or Elongated Tongue. Really, any of these talents work out okay, but generally Tunneling Claws is what's picked up in this build, so you can play really aggressive and use your E to get out. Level 20. Now, in Storm League, Adaptation tends to have a higher win rate, but in competitive, the game-ending potential of Contagion is just too great to pass up, which is why Isolation and Contagion are usually still picked up in the competitive environment. So, early game on Dehaka, what should you be doing and what should you be thinking about? Well, you don't have the ability to double soak quite yet, especially on bigger maps like this. So you should be sticking in your one lane, and you should be in the lane opposite of the first objective. Then your goal is to keep the enemy distracted for as long as possible, and you can see he's pulling the cams into turret range so that the turrets can help clear up the cams. He's then going to back here so that he can either run back to lane or he can Z to join the objective and force a 5v4. If Sylvanas stays bot, he forces a 5v4, and if Sylvanas ends up going to the objective, then he can get an extra wave of experience that the Sylvanas can no longer get. So in this case, a Sonya goes down to the bottom lane. He covers this lane, and now he can force a 5v4 if he wants to, or he can just hold the lane. Now, Sonya needs to make a decision really fast. Does she stay, or does she go to the objective? If she stays, she might not get any value here, because he can simply just clear up the lanes. But if she decides to go, then he can push and cost her one extra wave of soak, potentially a turret, and still join the objective. So that's the major downside about this, is that there's the Sonya is kind of put in a no-win situation, which is why I said Dehaka forces these checkmate positions. Dehaka forces these positions where there's no real winning. You basically have to choose between lose or lose worse, and so most people end up just choosing to lose. In this case, with two people down in the bot lane, he's going to distract as much as he can while his team goes for the objective. But in this case, they actually just want to stall the objective because they have that potential. Both teams are going with objective stall features. On the side of his team, they have the Brightwing who's stalling with Dream Shot and with the Stitches who can hook whoever tries to go for the objective. And on the opposing team, they have Lutano, the Junkrat, who can stall with that. He jumps in the team fight, gets rid of the enemy staller by jumping in the back line so that the enemy staller has no real escape, and now he can join the fight. Now, Falstad is going to be covering the lane in the bot currently, and the enemies do have the ability to stall, so he's going to try to push up a little bit. Maybe he grabs an enemy with his tongue, and he decides it's not really worth it, and he's going to go back to lane. This is where the other playstyle of Dehaka was a little bit more valuable, because if you got in a lane alone, then you could push much more, forcing the enemies to react. So in this case, he ends up pulling Cure away from the escape a little bit. They don't end up leading to a kill, though, so it's a little limited. So again, he's back in the same situation as he was. He has his Brush Stalker in about 7 seconds, and the enemies have an extra camp. The enemies are level 10s, and his team's not, so he's going to do what he can to get level 10s. He gets level 10s, and now he's going to try to pull these in so it's easier for him to kill them. He's deciding what talent he wants to go. Again, it's really debatable because W build works really well with adaptation, but isolation is huge in the competitive environment because if you can isolate a single target, your team generally can abuse that and lead to some pretty major fights and value. The biggest reason for that is it's basically a cocoon, except for it's a cocoon that you can kill the target off of. So if you isolate, let's say, a Deckard, they have no healing. It's like Deckard is cocooned, but you can also just kill the Deckard. Same thing with Sonya. Sonya survives for a long time if she's spinning, so forcing her to not have that ability is also pretty big. So because he was able to kind of distract the enemies for a long period of time, gaining value, forcing the Sonya away, and he was able to jump to the team to lead to a couple kills, or at least one kill. They were able to get that first objective, even though it took a very long time. He then immediately goes to the boss, and he pushes out the wave, so the minions are dying to this, and the enemies are missing out on soak. But the enemies are also missing, so they're most likely on their boss as well, which makes this boss even more of a safe play, and even more of a necessary play. The next objective's top, so he might actually just push with this boss, or they might leave the Falstad to push with the boss. The enemies actually went for a pretty bold engage, and he can use his E to dodge both the Deckard root and the Mei stun. And now his team's going to go up to the objective. He's going to continue pushing bot. And again, this is where the other build would be a little bit more valuable. I guess not really yet because he's not 13 anyways, but it is just a little bit more valuable when you're trying to push like this. So now he's waiting to see if there's anything that he needs to Z2. There's nothing that he needs to Z2. And so he just continues to just hang out. Dehaka is rather boring in the early game. Unless you're on a smaller map where you can double soak, a lot of it is not showing where you are and just covering the soak. Because if you stay, then the enemy stays. And if you push, then the enemy tries to react. You end up going with Primal Swarm. Ferocious Stalker tends to be a little bit better at sticking to the targets in Storm League, but Primal Swarm is a little bit better in competitive when your team is attacking the targets that you're engaging on. So Falstad's backing up at top lane. He probably should have shifted to top lane before this objective spawned, because now he can't really abuse the global. But he can still join his team. I want you guys to really pay attention to what bushes he tends to jump to. So he is currently jumping to a bush behind the enemy team. He does end up getting hit by the sleep. He goes for an isolation on the healer. And he still has his tongue. Now he doesn't drag the target anywhere. He uses the tongue primarily as a stun. And he led to 2 very valuable kills. Now he can go to the opposite lane, but he won't have his global for that. So he's going to stay with his team, distract the enemies a little bit, and kind of just go from there. Now he can head up to top lane, but he really just wants to be in the opposite lane of the next objective, which happens to be bot lane. So he's in a pretty good spot now. So when he's jumping to a bush, he tries to jump to a bush that's slightly behind the enemies and in the middle of the fight. And he's really abusing the fact that he's not trying to overly push because he wants to play safe. one of the best ways to beat double or triple global team comps is to kill the global hero. They tend to push really heavily so they get value of the global, and when they push really heavily, they lose value in other areas. And so one of the major areas that they're going to lose value is that they're going to be a lot riskier. If you're pushing the opposite lane heavily, then you're at a much greater risk. So you need to, if you don't see where everyone is, you can't push at all. Here we see the Tunneling Claws. Like I said, it was a pretty common talent for keeping people safe. So again, he sees 3 people, he decides to start pushing. He starts creating that checkmate, and then he decides to jump in. I think this is a little early for him to jump in, because he can't follow up on this. I would have liked to see him jump in a little bit later, force the enemies to show up here, and then jump in and force a fight. But Junkrat can still stall for a pretty long time, so I think that this is a tad bit early, but that's okay. Valstad decides to jump in as well, and they are heavily forcing this fight. But Junkrat can still interrupt for quite a while, giving the enemy team time to react. And in this case, Yasu goes to block the Junkrat bombs, and now he's trying to zone out as much as he can, and this should be the objective now. And that was a great hook coming out from Stitches. He goes with an isolation to make sure that she can't use her trait, nor use her icing, nor even her ice wall, as all 3 of those could have potentially gotten her out. If she would have used ice wall at the same time as her trait, the ice wall would have locked down enough of the enemies, and the trait would have made her unstoppable to any stuns that are going on. Then she could have used her E to get away, as everyone is still locked in ice wall. So to follow up the hook and the polymorph with a isolation allowed his team to lead to the enemy tank kill, and allows him to push forward where the enemies don't really have any real defense against this. Then, to follow up the polymorph, he was going to go for a tongue, but they were able to lead the kill anyways, and he goes for a tongue to lead to another kill. So you can see, his early portion of the game was a lot of waiting, not letting the enemies know where he was, and the later portions of the game, he's just following up his team. So the pros like using Dehaka because it forces people into that checkmate situation, it allows your team to have the global to join your team, and he's one of the best follow-ups in the solo lane that you can find because he has 2 amazing follow-up abilities that you can use depending on the situation. And those are the primary reasons why Dehaka is used. Now, if you want to further the checkmate position, say you're in a NGS team and you do want someone who's scarier if left alone, and your team's much better at stalling, and then forcing the fights when you want to force the fights. Let's say you've got a Junkrat to stall and you've got like a Joe Anduin to force a fight on your terms. If you're running something like that, then you might want to adjust to the old HEC playstyle, which has actually been buffed since the last time that people have really played it. Because this used to be 1%, now it's 1.25, and so you can play that more aggressive playstyle and checkmate people even further by forcing them to either leave someone top, and then jumping in and forcing a fight on your terms as a 5v4, or you don't leave someone top and he takes your forts very early on without you really having any answer to it. This particular playstyle is great for competitive, but if you'd like a more solo queue oriented playstyle, you can shift level 1 to enhanced agility, or even keep this the same depending on what maps you're on. If there's not a lot of bushes around, this talent's a little bit better. If there's more bushes around, this talent's a little bit better. You can leave this talent the same. You can switch this talent to Ferocious Stalker to slow people so you can stick to them a little bit longer. Run Adaptation to stay, and then play it kind of like URL. You go into their backline, you zone out their backline, and you let your team kill off their front line while Adaptation heals you back up. Then your trait heals you back up, and then you get another trait available because you've been using your W for so long, and you can last for a really long period of time. So that's another possibility that you can do. And so right here, he's Hearthing, and there's no real reason for him to Hearth. He's at full health, full mana, but he wanted to just be closer to answering the boss. But when his team decided to go for the boss, he just wanted to stay. But yeah, so this playstyle could work really well in Storm League. In fact, there is a Dehaka one trick who runs a variation of this build. He goes Enhanced Agility, he takes all the W talents, and then he goes into Ferocious Stalker. And he has about a 55% win rate in Masters, Grandmasters level of play, playing Dehaka. That being said, Dehaka is one of the lower win rate heroes in the game, or at least he has been for some time. And it's primarily because people don't know when to Z and they don't know where to Z. You need to Z into the enemy backline, and you need to do it at the right time. If you don't solidify that checkmate and then use your Z at the right time, then you're just wasting time. If you Z in too early, then the enemies just walk away. And then the solo laner has time to catch up and get to the lane, and your global was useless. If you Z too late, then the enemies fight a 5v4, and you end up just losing the team fight. So that's the biggest issue with Dehaka's win rate in these Storm League games, is he requires really, really good game sense. And so keep that in mind as you go through. Level 20, he does take that contagion, that potential game-ending ult. If his team sets up with anything and he gets a good contagion, the game is over. It's one of the ults with one of the best potentials for closing out a game. Having isolation splash to everyone reduces their vision for 6 seconds, so healers can't really heal their team. Point and click abilities like Sylvanas won't be able to attack anyone but the tanks. And also, they're all going to be silenced and slowed for 3 seconds as well, and they're going to take a lot of damage too. 400 damage is nothing to scoff at, and overall, it's just a really powerful talent. So once again, we see that he goes into the bottom lane to start pressuring. He's going to get these catapults pushed up to the point that they're threatening, but he's also watching this at the same time. If he sees that the teams are immediately fighting, he's going to brush talk behind the enemy team. He's going to jump into the team. They get gusted into a wall. He uses Contagion. Contagion now has hit everyone, or at least it's hit... Okay, no, it just hit the Sylvanas. So they lead to a 3 kills off of him engaging and forcing the fight. The enemies could not leave. The Sylvanas could not help at all, and they lead to these kills. So this is what Dehaka does for this team. Forces the enemies to react, joins the team, and follows up the team. And that's it. You don't need to engage with isolation. You don't need to engage with drag. In fact, both of those are really hard to engage with because they're kind of predictable on where you're going to throw them. But what you do bring to the team is a lot of macro potential. The way that I would play Dehaka in Storm League is different from the way that competitive players will play. So if you are playing this to learn from this playstyle for Storm League, I would recommend adjusting the level 1 talent, depending on how many bushes are available. The level 7, well, we'll go the level 10 talent, the adaptation, the level 10 talent, or 13. I am way off on my numbers today. 13 talent to Ferocious Stalker, and then level 20 I would go with the upgraded ult as well. That would make it to where you're going to be a lot scarier in team fights, you'll last through a lot more, and there's much more that you can do with Dehaka, even if you miss your Q or you can't follow up on what your team's doing. Hopefully this video helps you guys out to learn how the competitive players are abusing Dehaka, why the pros are playing Dehaka, as well as a little bit on how you can learn from this playstyle to enhance your gameplay with Dehaka. Thank you guys so much for watching, and feel free to check out my other videos.